listening to the 4 Questions with an Engineer podcast, the show that brings you bearing insights from CCTY Bearing. On this episode, we are discussing the standard ball bearing. Corey, why do you think that this bearing has been around for more than 200 years and unchanged?
So the concept of a rolling bearing has been around basically ever since the wheel was invented. It didn't take too long for people to realize it was easier to move an object using a roller than it was just to push the object on the ground. So it most likely started with moving large stones for buildings, and people realized using rollers to transport the heavy objects was a much more efficient way. Then if we go forward to the 1500s, we can see Leonardo Da Vinci sketched one of the first ball bearing sketches available, and it's basically the same exact design that's used in the modern ball bearing. The issue was the material was not strong enough and reliable enough to use for ball bearings at that time. So it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution when rolling bearings were more widely used and they had the endurance to give them a use case over sliding bearings. And then the last 50, 60 years, we've exponentially grown manufacturing and technology to create very reliable and very useful ball bearings.
What are the benefits of ball bearings?
I'd say the main benefit of a ball bearing is less power loss and heat generation. They're also beneficial to occupy short axial distances, and they can be used at much higher speeds than sliding bushings can be used.
How often do these bearings need maintenance?
It really depends on the application. Generally, whenever the grease needs to be replaced, it's important to service the bearing. And if there's contamination, it's important to service the bearing. And then obviously, if you feel any looseness or tightness in the bearing, you might want to look into it. But an interesting aspect of ball bearings is generally all the failures come from lubrication or contamination. There's a small percentage of bearing failures that come from the installation method or the choice of the bearing, and then just a fraction of percentage of bearings come from the actual material or production. So it really shows it's important with application engineers to make sure you're using the correct bearing, because if the grease or bearing is wrong, that's probably why you're going to get a failure. You're not really going to get too many failures if you chose the correct bearing, you chose the correct grease, and you chose the correct seal. You'll have a very small percentage of bearing failures at that point.
What are a few types of ball bearings, and how do they differ from each other?
So if we just focus in the realm of ball bearings alone, we can generally separate them into what direction the load is taking. So the deep groove ball bearing, which is the ball bearing that comes to everyone's head when they think of a ball bearing, is meant for primarily radial loading. And then there's axial deep groove ball bearings that are meant primarily for axial loading. There's also angular contact ball bearings, which take the load at an angle, and they're meant for a combined radial axial load. And you generally will see angular contact ball bearings as a double row because the axial direction is in both directions. So one row takes the axial direction in one direction and the other row can take the axial direction in the other way. And then they both can take the radial load. There's also a 4-point contact ball bearing, which is just a single row and can take an axial load in both directions. There's contact point 2 on the upper raceway, outer raceway, and 2 on the inner raceway. And this is kind of a more compact bearing design that can take axial loading in both directions. And then in those classifications of bearings, we can separate out into many different ways as well. There's different materials used for different applications, whether it be for temperature, for corrosion resistance, for weight. And then from there, you can go with a lot of different grease choices as well, depending on the surrounding application. If it's in a food area where it needs to have a certain type of grease, or if it's surrounded by water. So really, there's endless different types of bearing designs when you get into that.
Thanks. This is good info. And that's all for this episode. Make sure to visit our website, cctybearing.com.